"If you are a real cowboy, prove it on my stallion." The words were not a question. They were a challenge, laid down like a steel rail in the dust of the yard. Lena stood on the veranda of her sprawling ranch house, a figure of quiet silk and carved jade in a world of leather and sun-baked timber. Before her, a man stood with his hat in his hands, his shoulders slumped with the weariness of a long road. His name was Finn, though he had not offered it. He had only asked for a day's work in exchange for a meal. 25 men with reputations and silver on their spurs, had tried to ride the black stallion she called Hay Foam, the Black Wind. 25 men had been thrown, humbled, and sent away. The horse was a monument to untamed will, a living piece of the raw land that had claimed her husband a year prior. Finn looked from her unreadable face to the corral where the stallion paced, a creature of midnight fury and muscle. He owned nothing but the worn clothes on his back and a saddle roll that held even less. He had nothing to lose but his pride, and that was a currency he had long since learned to spend sparingly. He looked back at her, at the two small children who watched from behind the folds of her dress. A boy with old eyes and a little girl with a curious stare. "Work first," Finn said, his voice raspy from disuse. "A horse like that deserves a man with a full stomach." It was not the answer she expected. The other men had swaggered and boasted. This man simply stated a fact, as if negotiating the price of grain. Lena gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a bargain. A meal for a chance at impossible glory, or more likely, a mouthful of dust. She did not expect him to succeed. She only expected him to try, and to fail, like all the others. The ranch was called the Jade Serpent, a name her husband had chosen. It was a place of stark beauty and profound silence. The house was grand, built of dark wood and filled with furniture that had traveled thousands of miles over sea and land, but it was a house holding its breath. Grief was in the grain of the floorboards and the stillness of the air in her husband's empty study. The loss of a partner was one thing, the loss of a partner in a foreign land, surrounded by neighbors whose curiosity often curdled into suspicion, was another. Lena ran the ranch with a precise, unyielding grip because she had no other choice. Her son, Wei, was 10 years old but carried himself like a man of 40. He watched Finn with narrowed, assessing eyes, his hands shoved into his pockets. He was the keeper of his father's memory, and he saw every stranger as a threat to that fragile legacy. His younger sister, Anne, was 5. She was made of lighter stuff, of curiosity and unfiltered truth. She peered at Finn from the doorway of the barn, a small shadow with bright, inquisitive eyes. And then there was Hay Foam. The stallion was more than an animal, he was the shape of Lena's grief. A wild, beautiful, dangerous thing that refused to be tamed. Every man who failed to ride him was a fresh confirmation of her husband's singular strength, a reminder of what she had lost. The horse was a challenge to the world, but it was also a memorial. Finn did not go near the stallion's corral. He took his meal in the shade of the barn, a simple plate of rice and beans that tasted richer than any banquet. Then he started to work. He began with the things no one else saw. He did not swagger toward the main event. Instead, he picked up a length of rope and walked the perimeter fence. He found a post loosened by the summer heat and spent an hour digging it out and resetting it firmly in the hard-packed earth. He noticed the high, grating squeal of the main gate's hinges and worked a dollop of axle grease into them until they swung open with a respectful silence. He saw a loose board on the steps of the cook house, a hazard for a running child, and he found a hammer and nails to secure it. One small thing at a time. The ranch hands, a quiet crew of men who kept their own counsel, watched him. They had seen the braggarts come and go. They saw something different in this man's methodical patience. He did not ask for orders. He simply saw what needed doing and did it. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of long practice. There was no wasted effort, no flourish. Just the quiet competence of a man who understood the physics of work. Wei followed him at a distance, a silent judge. He saw Finn rebraid a frayed lariat, his large, calloused hands working the leather with surprising dexterity. He watched him clear a clog from the water trough, his arms deep in the murky water without a moment's hesitation. This was not the work of a showman. It was the work of a man who knew the 100 small tasks that kept a place like this from falling apart. In the evening, Finn took his second meal and retired to an empty stall in the barn, spreading his bedroll on a pile of clean straw. He did not ask for a bed in the bunkhouse. He asked for nothing at all. From her window, Lena watched the single lantern he lit in the barn, a small point of gold in the vast darkness. He was not what she expected. The next morning, and was the first to approach him. She walked right into the barn, her bare feet making no sound on the dusty floor, and stood before him as he mended a piece of harness. "Are you going to ride hay phone today?" she asked, her voice clear as a bell. Finn did not look up from his work immediately. He finished stitching the leather, his movements deliberate. Then he met her gaze. "Not today," he said. "The horse isn't ready." He threw Mr. Henderson into the water trough and offered, as if sharing a piece of delightful gossip. He kicked the blacksmith's hat off. Finn allowed a small smile to touch the corner of his mouth. "He sounds like he has strong opinions." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small block of soft pine and a whittling knife. As he spoke, his hands began to move, shaving thin curls of wood from the block. And watched, mesmerized. She asked him about the towns he'd seen, the rivers he'd crossed. He answered in short, simple sentences, his focus on the wood in his hands. By the time the sun was high, the block of pine had become a perfect, palm-sized horse, its head arched, its tail flowing. He smoothed the last rough edge with his thumb and held it out to her. And took it with a gasp of pure delight. She cradled it in her hands, her face lit with a joy so pure it felt like a sound. She ran back to the house, shouting for her mother to see. Later, Wei appeared. He stood with his arms crossed, his expression skeptical. "The bay mare in the south pasture," he said, his voice a test. "She's favoring her left foreleg. What do you think it is?" Finn wiped his hands on a rag and walked with the boy to the pasture. He did not touch the horse at first. He just watched her walk, his eyes missing nothing. "Stone bruise," he said finally. "She needs her hoof packed with clay and rested for a few days." Not a bad 1 inch. He showed Wei how to mix the poultice, explaining the reason for each step. He treated the boy not as a child, but as a fellow worker, a future foreman. Wei said nothing, but his gaze lost some of its hard, suspicious edge. That evening, when Finn returned to his stall, he found the wooden horse and had received sitting on his bedroll. Next to it was a small, perfect peach. Lena observed it all from the house. She saw the silent gate. She saw the repaired step. She saw the small, carved horse in her daughter's hands, an object, and now refused to sleep without. She heard from her cook that Wei had asked a question about poultices. These were small things, but on the quiet, guarded landscape of the Jade Serpent ranch, they were seismic shifts. She had offered the man a bargain of spectacle and failure, and he had answered with quiet, useful service. He never mentioned the stallion. He simply continued his work, finding the rhythms of the ranch and fitting himself into them. One morning, he found a clean tin cup and a bucket of fresh, cool water waiting for him by the barn door, saving him the walk to the main well. The next day, a bar of soap appeared beside it. They were small offerings, gestures of acknowledgement that required no words. One evening, the cook brought his plate out to the barn. It was not leftovers from the ranch hand's mess. It was a portion of the same meal the family had eaten in the main house, delicate steamed fish, fresh vegetables from her garden, a small bowl of savory broth. Finn looked at the plate, then at the cook, who simply shrugged and walked away. He understood. It was a message. He was being seen. He ate the meal slowly, savoring the unfamiliar flavors. He had not eaten food like this in years, food prepared with care instead of just for fuel. It tasted of a world he had long since left behind. In return, he took it upon himself to repair the intricate latticework on the veranda, which had begun to split in the dry heat. He worked for 2 days, patiently replacing the broken pieces, his movements careful and precise. Lena watched him from her husband's study, the account ledgers forgotten on the desk before her. He was restoring a piece of her home, a piece of the beauty her husband had so loved. He was doing it without being asked, without any expectation of extra pay. He was answering her silent reciprocation with his own. The language of work and care was the only one they shared, and it was becoming more eloquent with each passing day. The quiet rhythm was broken by the arrival of a polished black buggy. Mr. Abernathy, the town banker, stepped out, a man whose smile was as smooth and hard as a river stone. He was dressed in a fine wool suit, entirely unsuitable for the summer heat, and he carried a leather portfolio. He had been a friend of her husband's, or so he claimed, and had offered his unsolicited assistance many times since his passing. Lena met him on the veranda, her posture rigid. Finn was nearby, oiling a saddle, close enough to hear the low murmur of their conversation. Abernathy's voice was a slick balm of feigned concern. "My dear Mrs. Chen," he began, "I was just reviewing some of the paperwork regarding your loan, and a small matter has come to my attention." A mere formality, I assure you. Finn kept his head down, but his hand stilled. He heard phrases that did not belong in a casual visit. Discrepancy in the original water survey, and the terms stipulated by my head office, and of course, your late husband's signature is on everything, but these things can be complex. Lena's replies were clipped and precise, but Finn could hear the tension tightening her voice. She did not trust this man, and her distrust was a sharp, cold thing in the warm air. Abernathy patted her hand. "Do not trouble yourself. I am here to help you navigate this. We will sort it all out." His smile did not reach his eyes. When he left, a faint, unpleasant scent of bay rum and deceit lingered in the air. Finn looked at the dust stirred up by the buggy's wheels. He knew the tone Abernathy had used. It was the sound a vulture makes when it begins to circle. He filed the memory away and went back to his work, but now he was watching for more than just loose fence posts. The sky had been a relentless, empty blue for weeks, but one afternoon, a change came. Bruise-purple clouds gathered on the western horizon, piling on top of one another with unnatural speed. The air grew thick and heavy, and an ominous silence fell over the ranch. Finn stopped his work, tasting the metallic tang of lightning on the air. He had seen skies like this before. He moved with a sudden urgency, his quiet pace replaced by efficient, focused action. He checked the latches on the chicken coop and the main barn doors. He walked the length of the creek that bordered the north pasture, his eyes on the dry, cracked earth. He found a place where the bank was low and spent the better part of an hour with a shovel, deepening a natural runoff channel that led away from the pasture. The ranch hands watched him, then, without a word, two of them came to help. The storm broke just after dusk. It was not just rain, it was a deluge. Water fell in solid, blinding sheets. Thunder cracked directly overhead, shaking the very foundations of the house. The creek, a gentle trickle that morning, became a raging, muddy torrent. A frantic shout from one of the hands alerted them. The north pasture fence, the one closest to the rising water, was threatening to give way. The cattle, terrified by the storm, were pressing against it, in danger of being swept away. Finn was already there, a lantern in his hand, the rain plastering his hair to his face. The diversion trench he had dug was helping, pulling some of the pressure off, but it wasn't enough. A main post was groaning, threatening to snap. Lena appeared at his side, a heavy oilskin coat thrown over her silk dress. Wei was right behind her, his small face pale but determined. "Tell us what to do," she said, her voice clear and steady over the roar of the water. For the first time, she was not the unapproachable owner, she was a partner against a common enemy. Together, the three of them, along with the ranch hands, worked through the heart of the storm, using ropes and sheer wool to brace the failing fence, driving the cattle back toward higher ground. It was brutal, exhausting work, and by the time the rain finally subsided, they were all soaked, shivering, and covered in mud. But the fence had held. The herd was safe. They gathered in the warm, dry air of the barn, the scent of wet wool and damp earth hanging around them. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and a sky full of stars. Lena sent Wei to the house to bring back a pot of hot coffee and blankets. She stood with Finn near the door, looking out at the glistening land. The silence between them was different now, forged in the shared crisis. It was comfortable, easy. You knew that was coming, she said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. Finn nodded, sipping the hot coffee she handed him. It burned away some of the chill. My father's ranch was in a box canyon in Colorado, he said, his voice quiet. We learned to read the sky. A storm like that. It could take everything in an hour. He stared out into the night, but he was seeing a different time, a different place. We had 2 good years. Then a flash fire took the winter grazing land. The next spring, a fever took half the herd. The bank took the rest. He said it without a trace of self-pity, the words worn smooth by time. It was simply the arithmetic of his life. For the first time, Lena understood the man before her. He was not just a drifter. He was a man who had built something and lost it. He understood the precariousness of it all. He knew what it was to stand on the edge of ruin. He knew the particular shape of her own fear because he had lived inside it himself. Mr. Abernathy was the banker who held our loan, he added, a final, quiet detail. Lena looked at him, and in the dim lantern light, she saw the full measure of his past, the hidden depth of his competence and his silence. He was not asking for her sympathy. He was offering her his understanding. It was a gift more valuable than anything else he could have given. 2 days later, Abernathy's buggy returned. This time, he did not bother with pleasantries. He strode onto the veranda, the leather portfolio in his hand, and his smile was gone. He looked from Lena to Finn, who was standing nearby, his presence a silent, solid fact. Mrs. Chen, Abernathy said, his voice clipped. I'm afraid the situation is more serious than I had hoped. He opened the portfolio on the veranda table, spreading out a map and several official-looking documents. As I feared, the new survey confirms the issue. The main well, the one that feeds this entire ranch, is located on the adjacent parcel of land, which belongs to the railroad. Your husband's original survey was mistaken. He tapped a line on the map with a manicured finger. Without access to that well, I'm afraid the ranch is worthless. The bank cannot carry the loan under these circumstances. Lena stared at the map, her face a pale, still mask. That cannot be correct, she said. My husband was a meticulous man, a common mistake, Abernathy said dismissively. But the fact remains. The loan is in default. However, out of respect for your late husband, I am prepared to make an offer. I will purchase the deed from you myself, for a modest sum. It will clear your debt and leave you with enough to relocate. It was a threat wrapped in the language of charity. He was using the storm, the ranch's vulnerability, to press his advantage. He was trying to steal her home from under her feet. She looked at the papers, at the crushing weight of the official stamps and elegant script, and for a moment, her composure wavered. She felt the ground giving way. She was alone, a woman in a man's world, with a language and a set of rules she was still learning. The respectable antagonist was closing his trap. Finn had his bedroll packed. He had seen this story before. He knew how it ended. He would not be a burden to her when she lost everything. He would just disappear, as he always did. But as he stood by the barn, ready to leave, a detail from Abernathy's speech snagged in his mind. The new survey. Why would a new survey be needed? He walked to the house. Lena was in her husband's study, staring blankly at the wall. The banker's papers were still on the desk. Mrs. Chen, Finn said softly. May I see your husband's original deed? The map he filed when he bought the land. She looked at him, her eyes full of a despair that mirrored his own old losses. She nodded toward a heavy wooden chest in the corner. Finn opened it. Inside, beneath neatly bundled letters, was a roll of parchment tied with a ribbon. He carefully unrolled it on the desk next to Abernathy's map. At first glance, they looked identical. But Finn was a man who noticed small things. He looked at the surveyor's mark, the small drawing of a distinctive split boulder that served as a boundary point. On her husband's map, the property line ran 20 yards to the west of the boulder. On Abernathy's map, it ran 20 yards to the east. The well was in those 40 yards. He forged it, Finn said, his voice a low rumble. This isn't a new survey. It's a forgery of the old 1 inch. Just then, they heard the buggy returning. Abernathy had come for his answer. He walked into the study, a pen in his hand. I trust you've made the sensible decision, Mrs. Chen. Finn did not raise his voice. He simply laid his finger on the 2 maps. Your boulder is in the wrong place, Mr. Abernathy, he said. And your forger used ink that isn't even dry yet. The banker's face went from confident to ashen. The bluff had been called. The quiet evidence, laid bare, was more powerful than any weapon. He crumbled, grabbing his papers and fleeing without another word. The silence he left behind was vast and absolute. Finn turned to go, to pick up his bedroll. Finn, Li Na said, speaking his name for the first time. He stopped. Stay. It was a single word, but it held everything. The past, the present, the possibility of a future. She then looked out the window toward the corral. There is still the matter of the stallion. The next morning, Finn walked into the corral. He carried no rope, no whip. He simply stood there as hay foam snorted and tore at the ground. He stood for an hour, then 2. He spoke to the horse in a low, calm voice. He did not try to break the animal's spirit. He was asking for its trust. Slowly, the stallion's wild eyes softened. He took a hesitant step forward, then another. Finally, Finn reached out a hand and laid it on the horse's powerful neck. An hour later, he swung a leg over Hayfoam's bare back. He rode not with force, but with a perfect, silent understanding. He made a slow circle of the corral, his eyes on Li Na, who stood on the veranda with her children. He had proven he was a real cowboy, not by conquering the wild thing, but by having the patience to understand it. That evening, he walked back to his stall in the barn. He looked at his packed bedroll for a long moment. Then, one small thing at a time, he began to unpack. Thank you for joining us at Quiet Hearth.